Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com.
Hey peeps, today we're going to take a look at Rum Bones from Cool Mini or Not. Finally, this one has been in the hopper for quite some time, and actually it's just a coincidence. I swear, I was actually kind of surprised that a couple of days ago they launched their new Kickstarter for like the next wave. I think they're calling it like the next wave or the next tide for Rum Bones. More stuff to add to the game, like another new base game. Same thing they do with Zombicide. But it's just a coincidence. I was finally getting around to doing this at the request of the fans of the channel. And by the way, this is just the retail version of the original Rum Bones. No bells or whistles or anything like that. Now, if you're not familiar with the game, this is 2 players or multiple players with teams game where you are taking control of a pirate crew, but like not normal historical pirates, like fantasy pirates basically. In fact, the 2 crews that are in the box, one of them are humans, the other ones are undead. So just take that with a grain of salt. There's also a kraken and a sea dragon and all of that. But how this game works is that you are focused purely on combat. In fact, it's like almost like a battle arena type game where both ships are lined up next to each other, and you're trying to invade the enemy ship and destroy all of the objectives, which are actually like the rigging and the mast and the main cannon. And while taking out all of your opponent's crew members and heroes and all that stuff in order to get victory points. Now that might sound a little confusing, so let me go ahead and give you an overview. But funny story. There was a large gap of time between when I actually received Rum Bones for review and consequently opened it up, baggied it, and all that different type of stuff, and when I actually played the game to review it. And sometime between there, I lost all of the cardboard tokens for my copy of the game. I'm sure they got mixed in with another box, and I tried for like an hour to find it, and I gave up because I have so many boxes and other games that it could be anywhere. It could be gone by this point, traded away accidentally. So so we used replacements when we played, but it would be really confusing if I showed you other games' components in the overview. So in the overview, there's no cardboard tokens, so no life point tokens, no gold coins, no dead man's tokens, no deployment zone tokens. I'm really sorry about that, so it's going to look really weird. But we did play the game with all the full rules. We just had to use replacements from other games and some generic cubes and stuff that I had. So just keep that in mind. But otherwise, doesn't affect this review whatsoever. Let's get to it.
Rum Bones is a competitive game that is primarily for 2 players, but it can be played with up to 6 players if you use team mechanisms. The rules don't change much, so we'll just talk about it as a 2-player game. The goal of the game is to be the first player to get to 6 victory points. Victory points are gained by taking out enemy objectives and killing the sea dragon or the kraken. Each player gets a ship and a set of miniatures corresponding to the faction of their choice. The base game has the Wellsport Brotherhood and the Bone Devils, who are undead. The shipboards are lined up next to each other, facing in opposite directions, with 3 gangplanks connecting them. Each shipboard has a set of 5 objective tiles that are placed in the same relative positions on each ship. Each objective has a number of hit points it can withstand losing before being flipped to its destroyed side. At that time, the player who destroyed it will take the tile, and then will be granted 2 victory points, some gold coins, and potentially a special bonus like extra health or cards. One objective is the deck gun, which has a whole other use. We'll get to that later. Each player has a crew consisting of deckhands, bosuns, and heroes. Each of the 3 central objectives on each side will start with 4 deckhands. Deckhands and bosuns are weak fodder that move and attack on autopilot, always moving in one of the 3 lanes towards your opponent's objectives. More on them later. Heroes, however, are much stronger and obey your exact commands using actions. Each player has 5 heroes, each in one of the 5 roles: Captain, Swashbuckler, Brute, Quartermaster, and Gunner. At the beginning of the game, you can bring 3 of your 5 heroes into play. Heroes have hit points as well and can be KO'd, but they effectively regenerate after being disabled for 1 full round. After that, you can either bring back that hero or a different one. They have access to attacks, abilities, and reactions, some of the most powerful of which will require spending coins to utilize. Coins are gained each round while a hero is in reserve, but otherwise must be gained by killing deckhands, bosuns, and other heroes. Any combat in the game resolves like this. Roll the number of indicated dice and count up each die that hits the target number. Each type of attack will also have an indicated range. There is a targeting priority when more than one type of target is in the same zone. It goes deckhands, then bosuns, then heroes, then objectives. Tide cards are drawn during the game. Each faction has their own deck, and the cards have special effects that you can use at will whenever events in the game trigger them. For instance, if your hero is about to take damage, you might immediately play a card to prevent that, or you might play a card to afflict an opponent's hero with status ailments right when it activates. One card in each deck can summon the Sea Dragon, which will inhabit a gangplank and knock anyone on it overboard, and until defeated it will attack indiscriminately with attacks like Poison Breath, but it does give you 2 points in extra movement for killing it. Some powerful Tide cards, including the Sea Dragon summoning card, have Kraken symbols on the bottom. Keep track of these by keeping them separate as they're used. Every turn you'll have to roll 2 dice. If the number rolled is equal to or lower than the Kraken symbols you've accumulated, the Kraken appears. His tile takes up the entire middle area between ships, destroying the gangplank and anyone on it. His incredibly powerful attacks are even more potent against the faction that accrued the most Kraken symbols that allowed him to be summoned. Whichever faction deals the killing blow gets 2 points and an extra die for their hero attacks. One player's full turn in the game goes like this. First, prepare the heroes by giving your reserves a coin and flipping over the dead man's tokens that indicate that they were just KO'd. Next round, the token is removed and you can summon another hero again. Second, you fire the deck gun. The deck gun is an objective that lets you make an attack with 4 dice on any zone of your choice, though the gun can't damage objectives. If your deck gun objective is destroyed, it can no longer be used, obviously. Third, you deploy more crew. Each of the 3 lanes has a deployment zone in the back, and you place 2 deckhands, if available, in each one, followed by 2 bosuns that you can place in any of the deployment zones. Fourth, you activate the crew. Every deckhand and bosun attacks one of the 4 zones around it if there's a viable target. The presence of the bosun will give each deckhand in the zone the ability to hit on 3 instead of 4 on the dice. After their attack, each deckhand and bosun group will advance 1 space towards the enemy ship. Fifth, you deploy your heroes if there's not already the right amount on the board. They also start in the deployment zones. Sixth, activate those deployed heroes. Each one gets 3 actions, which could be used to use attacks or abilities, or to move 2 zones for each action spent, though you can't move into enemy spaces. You could use the rigging to glide over to the enemy ship if you're near the rail of the 2 ships, but this is risky, and if you fail a dice roll, you end up overboard for the rest of the round. 7th phase involves the Kraken. Check to see if it gets summoned as described before. If it does, then on subsequent rounds you'll use this phase to activate it and make its random powerful attacks. 8th phase, and finally, you draw Tide cards up to your max of 3. Before you do this, you may discard cards in order to free up your hand. You repeat this process of turns for each faction until one side gets to 6 points. Now, on to my final thoughts.
Well, thematically, I think Rum Bones hits it out of the park. Now, I'm actually not a fan of pirate themes, to say the least. In fact, I think there's only 2 themes I hate worse than pirates, and that's the Wild West and cats being used as exploding devices, to put not too fine a nose on it. But it works here, and I think part of the reason why it works for me personally is because this isn't really pirates, this is fantasy pirates. This is pirates by way of like the Sword Coast of the Forgotten Realms, where you've got the undead, and you've got sea krakens and sea dragons and all that stuff. And even the way that you use your powers feels almost like spells at a certain point with the coins. So that theme appealed much more to me, and also because this focuses narrowly on the combat aspect and not like trading in the Mediterranean. So I really appreciate what they went for with the theme here. And of course, going on to the components, it's a Cool Mini or Not game, so it's pretty obvious that the components are going to be very high quality, and that's no exception here. The miniatures are good. I know they didn't probably come out in the overview video too well, but they're good quality. There's plenty of them, even with just the retail version. Of course, with the Kickstarter version, I don't know for sure, but you probably get a ton of them. So if you get a hold of that one, you'll be even more happy with the miniatures, I'm sure. All the artwork looks really good, and even the rule book, which is, for Cool Mini or not always a good thing. Some of their rulebooks are pretty bad, but the rulebook here was pretty straightforward and to the point. There's lots of lore in there if you really care about that kind of stuff. But let's talk about the gameplay. For me, this game just did not work. I like what they went for here. And I think that there are some elements of it taken by themselves I think are pretty cool and neat. Like, I thought, okay, there's just like these crew members, deckhands, and bosuns that are just on autopilot. That sounds kind of dull. But it's actually an interesting mechanism, how they just continually move forward, and you're just trying to manipulate them or clear out your opponents as best you can with your heroes, which are the far more interesting characters. And in fact, I'll even go so far as to say that the first round or two of this game that I've played, I liked. And then you get to the third round, and it's the exact same thing. And then you get to the fourth round, and it's the exact same thing. And then the Kraken shows up, and then it's just the exact same thing. Do you see what I'm getting at here? This is a game that mixes repetition with extreme amounts of randomness, which sounds like they're two divergent things, like they shouldn't be coming together. But what I mean by that is that every round of this game feels pretty much the same, and the only things that are sort of exciting that are happening are completely random, including the Kraken coming out. And it's just random whether or not you get lucky enough to roll a bunch of good rolls in your dice and KO the enemy hero. But then the enemy hero comes back. Then you do it all over again. And more of these deckhands and bosuns keep flooding out, which is like, again, I think the mechanism, the idea of it is neat, but the actual logistics of every round having to continually put out these figures over and over and over again is not fun. In fact, having to roll for the Kraken over and over and over again, not fun until it finally comes out. There's just a lot of tedious things in this game for what's supposed to be an exciting, like, you know, sword and sorcery, like, you know, pirates swashbuckling, jumping over rigging. Everything just felt very bleh, and like very surprisingly so. I thought if nothing else, this game would be exciting. Maybe I was sure it'd probably be too random for me, but I thought at least I'd be engaged the whole time. There's also questions of balance as well, which is not something I feel all that confident talking about, because I only played this game twice. I will fully divulge that here. I wanted to play it a third time, and then I said, no, I really don't want to play it a third time. That's how bad a time I had with it. Now, the two plays that I had were with 2 players and with 4 players. And I will tell you right now, 2 players or bust. You do not want to play this with multiple players. It just exacerbates the length of time of the game. The game is already long enough with 2 players, because you might think, oh, 6 points. Kill some objectives. Kill some monsters. What's the big deal? It is a big deal, because you have to mow through these waves and waves and waves of creatures coming over and over and over again. And with the repetition, it just feels way longer than it should be. Even if it might seem like a shorter amount of time, it feels longer. But back to the balance thing I was originally talking about. First off, and I've seen other people mention about this in the forums after the fact when I went to look up more information about the game. People seem to complain about the first player advantage. I feel that a lot, actually. That kind of was the case in both games that I played, where it seemed like the first player had a very distinct advantage in being able to just potentially, depending on how you do it, run up and just deal a lot of damage to an objective. I feel like the cannon, the main cannon that both players can use against each other, is a very neat idea. Again, in and of itself, a neat idea. But if one player loses their cannon, which happened in one of the games that I played, the multiplayer game, very early, that is a huge crippling thing. Yeah, it's possible that you just never do that well with the cannon anyways from randomly rolling. Again, the randomness being a really irritating thing in this game. But if the other player is doing really well with it and then you don't even have a chance to respond, that's a big deal. And there's a lot of weird things like that. The characters seem not very balanced, and you only have 2 factions in this box. You don't have a ton of options. You have options as to which heroes you put out, and they're all very interesting. I do like the diversity of the characters and their abilities, but some of them are clearly better than others. And where to the point where in both games we found ourselves sort of crutching on different characters. Like, well, I know this character just got KO'd. I'm pretty much just waiting for it to recharge again to put it back out. I don't really care about the coins on the other ones because the abilities of this one are so good. I'll just build up coins again. The coins that are building up in reserve on the other characters might entice you to want to play as them, but that doesn't happen as much as you would think because some characters are just better. It's just the way that it is. So balance is a thing. And now I don't think that this game is supposed to be tremendously balanced. It is supposed to be an Ameritrash romp, right? But then we go back to the repetition thing. If it's just supposed to be a dumb random romp, why does it feel so slow to me? So, for me personally, this has got to be a pass. I like the theme, surprisingly. I like the components. I like individual aspects of the game that are very interesting to me, as well as, and I'll stress this again, because I probably didn't stress it enough, the diversity of the 10 total crew members, heroes that you have in the box. But with the randomness, with just the dull tedium round after round of doing the same thing, putting out the miniatures over and over again, and just waiting for a couple of exciting things to happen, I just can't recommend it. I mean, it was just a very, it was a chore. This was a kind of game that felt like a chore, even though I can't strictly call it a terrible game. It's one that I'm not interested in playing again. That is Rum Bones, the base retail edition from Cool Mini or Not. Pass.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.